part of what happens in the New Testament, as far as I can tell, is that what Christ says, so he's trying to transcend the rule structure, right? Not because there's anything wrong with the rules. They're a necessary precondition for discipline, which is actually why I wrote 12 rules, right? It's like you need rules, but rules conflict and they don't always apply. And so there has to be an ethic underlying the rules, and you should have more respect for the ethic than for the rules.
Right.
Okay, Christ's idea, and this is part of the idea of the reestablishment of paradise, is that you should orient yourself towards the good. And that's something like an alliance with God. And then that you should tell the truth. And that's the ethic that generated the rules to begin with. Okay, and then we could be serious about this, you know. And we could say, well, how do you adjudicate the reality of that claim? All right, so then we might think, well, we already walked through the fact that the heroes of the past acted on potential to extract out the world of actuality. And if they did that properly, then the world they extracted was good. And that is a divine principle. And then we might say, well, is it a divine principle? And you might say, well, what is it that's acting through people in the good? Like the Christian theological answer to that would be the logos, right? That's the idea. That's the idea of the Holy Spirit, roughly speaking.
Right.
You might think, well, is that a real thing? It's like, well, to me, it's real the same way that consciousness is real. And we don't know the role of consciousness in determining reality. But even if you're an evolutionary biologist, and this is so interesting because the evolutionary biologists actually differentiated themselves from Darwin on this point. Like Darwin was very, very forthright in his claim that sexual selection was as powerful as natural selection, or even more so. And so here's where that goes. And because that brought consciousness into the world as an active player, the materialistic evolutionary biologists ignored that for like 150 years and only concentrated on natural selection, where they could play, well, this is all chance.
Right.
It's like, sexual selection is not chance. Okay, so here's a hypothesis. Human beings separated themselves from chimpanzees. One of the reasons they did that was because human females are sexually selective. Chimps aren't. Female chimps in estrus will mate with any chimp. The main chimps, the dominant ones, chase the subordinate males away. So they're more likely to have offspring, but it's not because of female choice.
Right.
Now, human females have done this whole different thing, is that they have hidden fertility, and they're much more likely to go after guys who have climbed up the hierarchy. So let's say heroes. We'll give the women some credit for intelligence, right? And say that that's what they're after. Even if they're using wealth and so forth and status as a marker, they're actually using those as a marker for competence.
Yeah, it's a stand-in.
Yeah, and I think I think the evidence for that is clear. Okay, so you might say, oh well, it was human female conscious choice that selected us. Okay, and you think, well, that's not random. That's not random at all. It's the farthest thing from random that there is, and that means consciousness is making its choices with regards to what propagates. But then it's even more complex than that. So here's what happens among men. The men all get together in their hierarchy. They posit a valued goal. They all accept that as the goal, because otherwise they wouldn't be cooperating.
Right.
Then they arrange themselves into a hierarchy, and they let the most competent guys lead because they want to get to the promised land. They want to get the most competent leaders leading.
Right.
Competent defined by that value. Okay, so here's what happens essentially. The men all get together and vote on the good men. And the good men are then chosen by the women, and those are the people who propagate. And so it's like men are voting on which men get to reproduce, and women are going along with the vote and being even more stringent in their choices, let's say. And so then what you get is that the consciousness that through its active expression transforms the potential of the world into actuality also selects the direction of evolution. Right, and that's where the meme, Dawkins' term, turns into the biological reality. It's not this is something that's so cool about Dawkins. It's like, I've often thought this about Dawkins, is if he would push his thinking to the limits, he would fall right into Jung. Well, and then he'd be lost, of course, because that's a whole other universe. But if you take that meme seriously, like, and I mean really seriously, you think, yeah, there's some ways conceptualizing that become so all-encompassing
Powerful that they hardwire themselves.
That's right. They start to become an actual force of evolution itself. And so then here's the case you can make. Consciousness extracts the proper world of being from potential through truth, and then it's good. It's like, okay, That's a hard one, man. That manifests itself in human beings at the individual level of individual consciousness. That's the logos within. That's the metaphysical foundation of the idea of natural right and responsibility. Okay, that's a bloody killer idea. That's expressed in the hero of heroes, that idea. That hero of heroes is the driving force behind human evolution. So not only do you get the action of the logos metaphysically as the process that extracts order out of chaos at the beginning of time, you also get it as the major driver of evolution. And so then you ask, okay, then what kind of reality does that have? Because you chase consciousness back, and like it disappears into the mystery of the past, and we have no idea what its relationship is with matter. But it's the force that gives rise to the cosmos and drives evolution. It's like you're getting pretty close to God there.
Yeah,
even just pragmatically speaking.
And you're certainly, not close to, but in the midst of an argument about free will, because obviously if you make the hard determinist argument that free will doesn't exist and that consciousness is merely a sort of trick that your brain is playing on itself, then how does culture propagate? How do these memes propagate? How are people choosing? Sexual selection and natural selection become one and the same as soon as you boil sexual selection down to natural selection. Right? So
well, and also I think the free will argument, I mean, I see why Harris gets tangled up in that, because, well, first of all, deterministic arguments are unbelievably powerful. And when we use deterministic models for many things, they really work.
Right.
So you could say, well, we're going to use that by default. It's like, fair enough. We're going to deviate from that with care. But I don't see people as driven like clocks winding down. First of all, we don't wind down in any simple way. We're dissipative structures. To use, he wrote Schrodinger, what is life? A human being is a dissipative structure. We're not an entropic structure like a clock running down. I mean, we are in some sense, but as living beings, we pull energy in. And so we're not winding down like a deterministic structure. We're something other than that. And the way we treat each other is as logos, as far as I can tell. The way I treat myself, if I'm going to be good to myself, in the proper sense, is that I'm an active agent of choice confronting an infinite landscape of potential and casting that potential into a reality for good or for evil. Okay, and if I treat myself that way, then I have proper respect for myself and proper fear of myself, because I can make bad decisions and warp the structure of reality. And I think if you read Frankl, for example, or Solzhenitsyn, and you see how your bad decisions can warp the structure of reality, then that wakes you up, right? Okay, so there's that. If you don't treat yourself like an active agent, imbued with logos, then your life doesn't go well. But more, if you don't treat other people that way, they do not want to play with you. If we set up societies that aren't predicated on the idea that people are like that, then the societies they dissolve or they become totalitarian almost instantly. So then I would say, well, you've got the problem of determinism. It's like, fair enough, man. How do you reconcile the fact that if you lay out a society at every level of analysis on strict deterministic grounds, it fails? So doesn't that mean your hypothesis has a flaw? I mean, maybe not. Maybe you can say, no, the facts are independent of the ethical consequences.
Right, exactly. This is where the truth pragmatism question comes back into being, right? Because Sam would say, well, it's true regardless of what the effect is, and you would say, well, it's obviously not true if morals are constructed for a pragmatic reason, and if this pragmatism doesn't work, if it falls into nothingness.
Well, it also depends to some degree on how you're willing to test your hypothesis. Because I might say, well, if your hypothesis is factually correct, wouldn't you assume that if people based their behaviors individually and familial and socially on that set of facts, which is basically what Sam claims about facts to begin with, if you based your ethos on those facts, wouldn't it work?
Right.
Well, he claims that that's a test, and I would say, well, then it fails that test. It doesn't work. We have to treat each other like divine centers of consciousness in order for society to work.